You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. In thinking of how to introduce today's guest, I was struck by the thought, how do you introduce someone who needs no introduction? Jill Heinerth is a world-renowned cave explorer, author, and modern-day pioneer of sidemount diving. She's a member of the Explorers Club, a fellow of the National Speleological Society, and has been inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. In 2016, Jill was named the first explorer in residence for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. In May of this year, Jill was awarded the Beneath the Sea Diver of the Year Award for Education. She is without a doubt one of the world's leading divers. Jill, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Hey, nice to be here with you.
Jill, way back when you were sitting watching the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau, did you ever dream that you would achieve so much in diving?
No, I mean, I just wanted to get underwater as a kid. I just remember being mesmerized by those programs and not just by the diving, but by his exploration of the world. That was all exciting. And so was the technology, seeing those triple tanks on their backs and all kinds of cool stuff that I knew nothing about.
I remember the helmets and the shiny suits.
Yeah. I mean, it made me want to be an explorer.
Yeah. And you made it a reality. I mean, of your achievements to date, what gives you the most satisfaction?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, last year, the Governor General of Canada awarded me with the Polar Medal, which there's only been, I think, 5 or 6 of them ever given. And that was just for my work at the extreme ends of the earth. My dad cried, so that made it really, really special.
Yeah, there's nothing like having your parents be proud of you, right?
Yeah, I think he finally got what I do.
And I guess there's an element of risk. I imagine your parents were gnashing their hands at many of the expeditions that you go on.
Oh, absolutely. I try to tell them about these things after they're done because it's a little easier for them to take.
I often talk to people about cave diving and nobody really gets it. They all think it's like an adrenaline sport like bungee jumping, and we all know it's not. So it's in fact probably opposite.
That's a really interesting point because people always say to me, "You're fearless," and I'm like, "No, I'm not at all." People that are in cave diving for a long time are actually very risk averse, and I feel so strongly about that I'm actually writing a book right now that'll be released a year from now.
Awesome.
About my expedition story, but framed around the topic of fear, because I want to dive with people who are afraid because it means they care about the outcome.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. And I've got some questions for you a little later on that as well. But obviously, this is about sidemount. So let's talk about that. When and how did you first dive sidemount?
I dove sidemount before backmount, actually. In Canada, growing up as a young diver, when I kind of exceeded the recreational limits, the first thing that someone gave me was something called a soft Benjamin manifold. We didn't have actual double tank manifolds. What we had was a hose that we would connect from one first stage over to another so that you could basically transfill on the go if you needed to. And so that we sort of played with pony bottles. And then it was like, this is dumb. Let's just hook tanks on our sides. And I didn't know anything about side mount diving. I took an old Sherwood Genesis BC and some bicycle inner tubes. And I had one that went across my shoulder blades and came out under my armpits. And the other one sort of down around my hips that was longer, that could sling the tanks. And they hung fairly horizontal, and it was just probably a mess. But as I remember it kind of worked. So that was my first sort of full-size double tank configuration. And when I learned to dive in Canada and then moved to the Caribbean islands and then eventually to Florida. And when I got to Florida to be properly certified in cave diving, they told me that we dive double tanks on our backs. Like, what's this side mount stuff? And by this point I had a proper sort of homemade rig. So I said, well, God, why would you want to do that? So I reluctantly tried doubles, thought it was just a horrible idea, dove them for years whenever I had to dive with someone wearing doubles, but always deferred back to my side mount rig.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I asked Steve Bogart's the same question. There's kind of the school of thought that side mount is a tool that really is only required for your passing restrictions, and yet there's people like now I've learned you, but certainly me, I learned to tech dive and side mount as well, and so I only dive side mount.
Yeah, absolutely.
I spoke to Brian Kaycock earlier in the week, and we spoke about the collaboration and writing the book Side Mount Profiles. Tell us a little about the book from your perspective and your motivations for writing it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, Brian and I have been diving together since 94 or 95, long time. Mm-hmm. And so we realized there really was no decent educational material out there. So we worked together to build the text and the pictures and shoot some videos and everything else so that we could distribute that.
I like the idea from the book. You kind of got a lot of different perspectives in there, because unlike back mount, Hogarth and DIR, there's not really a universally accepted one way of diving side mount. I mean, I dive very similar to Steve Bogart's. I have a short hose on my left, a long hose on my right. My SPGs lay along my cylinders. But from what I've seen on your videos, you dive a different configuration. So I'd be interested in how you develop that and why.
Yeah. Well, I still continue to modify my side. I kind of like trying everything that comes out, so that when I work with someone to properly fit them, I've had some experience using a particular rig. So I like to try everything, and sometimes that means I switch rigs. But the other thing that's a big issue for me is it's a whole different ballgame for women. And it really is for all kinds of different sized people. I mean, the first side mount rigs were developed by guys. And to begin with, like, the distance from the nape of your neck to your waistline on a guy is a lot longer than it is on a woman. Our center of balance is completely different. We have sort of downward sloping shoulders and smaller necks, where a guy has a bigger neck and squarer shoulders. So all of these things, we have boobs, of course, but all of these things mean that a side mount rig fits completely differently. And I always tell people there's no perfect side mount rig. There's no best out there. There's no favorite manufacturer. Everything has to be custom fitted if you want it to be optimized. Like, a woman could put on a rig and it just falls off her narrow shoulders. And so she might be able to fix that with a chest strap that other people would hate, or that a larger, chested woman would find uncomfortable. Or she may need to find something. Like years ago, I helped out Halcyon when they were trying to develop a smaller contour rig. And I said, the first thing you got to do is move the shoulder straps in for, narrowness for that smaller person, and shorten the back plate area. All of those things just mean that every body has a different way or center of balance, different dimensions. And then to top it all off, we buy different regulators. So, yours might have ports that stick out here and here, and mine might stick out this way. And you might have a rotating turret, someone else might not. And that means a lot of different hose lengths and
hoses are big, aren't they? And certainly, the way I tend to do it is with the rotating turret and fifth port. It helps hose routing. It makes everything nice and clean. But I'm teaching a course at the end of October, and I don't want to say to my student, hey, go and buy a new rig. So we're going to have to manage his hose routing. So,
there's always a way to work it out, almost always.
Well, it works something out. It's a matter of how clean it is right at the end of the day. But cool.
There's even things like, some people say you've got to have this tiny little short hose to reach the dry suit, but do you really? I mean, I've had my short hose blow and I replace it with a big long 28-inch long thing, and then it's like, okay, so I just root it down my chest underneath the chest strap, and then I plug it in, and it's like, okay, it's still streamlined, but
what I see here, it's almost a classic explorer versus dedicated instructor type philosophy. Explorer is going to do what works and maybe what needs to work in the field, and maybe sometimes you need to, in the heat of battle, you need to change something, whereas we're trying to make everything look perfect all of the time. So I get that 100%. And
I get a little crazy when I see like instructors say, you must come with a 24-inch hose, and it's like, why?
Well, I think in defense of us, I think what we try and do is get everything as perfect as we can to begin with. and starting suboptimal maybe isn't the right way. But again, as I say, you can get way too pedantic about things as well. And so there's got to be a happy medium about doing what works. One of the interesting aspects of the interviews I've done so far is the amount of development work that's going into Sidemount Rebreathers right now. I spoke to Steve Bogarts about the Liberty. I spoke to Gary Dallas about the SF2. Brian Kaycock's working with the KISS Sidekick. And I know you've done a heap of work in this area. Can you share a little about your experiences and also where you see this going in the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I'm a side mount diver, I thought, oh, wow, I want a side mount rebreather. And then I'll be able to, squeeze through a little restriction into the next aircraft hangar, pull it through, put it back on, that kind of stuff. So in my earliest attempts at that, I took 2 of my Meg rebreathers, broke them up and tried to work it out. And that's when I sort of figured out, geez, there's a lot of issues with side mount rebreathers, not the least of which is the fact that when that canister's down the side of your body, it's no longer optimized for the centroid of your lungs. Therefore, the work of breathing is going to suck, especially if you're in a vertical position. If you're, dead planed out flat, great, that's fine. But there's certainly a lot of issues, flood prone, sensor positioning can often mean that some of them are getting much wetter than others. And so you're not getting good O2 tracking. So my whole early Meg experiment kind of failed because I was trying to build a dual redundant side mount rebreather. And by the time I had all my full dual redundant tanks, breathing loops, everything else, I wasn't actually measured myself, and I wasn't any smaller than my back mounted dual rebreather with bailout tanks. So I kind of shelved it for a while, and then I tried a lot of different rigs and came back around recently to play around with the Liberty, because I've been watching that for a few years and I was intrigued by a bunch of things I wanted to try. And I like it. I really like it. I still consider myself a newbie on the Liberty compared to all the other hours and everything else I have. And I quite like it, but it still is, the issue of you've got to be horizontal. And I still, realize that it's much easier to flood any side mount rebreather. And so that makes me a little wary. So side mount rebreather diving, I don't think it's ever going to be like the first rebreather for someone. Some of the skills are really quick, easy, very intuitive, like especially on the Liberty where you've got the little injection levers very close to your mouth. It's extremely intuitive to do the skills. But I'm still kind of in the camp that I'd rather see someone learn a back mount rebreather first, so they know, what the common work of breathing is like, and they have a little more flood tolerance. And then, if they feel they have the need, consider that side mount rebreather.
To me, going back mount is a boring, because I've grown up 100% dive side mount, hundreds and hundreds of dives now. So then say, hey, I'm going to go back mount. So my question is to Steve and to Gary and to Brian is sort of how real are these units? And I think what the change that I've seen is all of the pioneers like yourself and Steve and Brian all went through the process of building your own side mount rebreathers, by breaking down back mount. And we're now seeing the manufacturers coming to the party, which I think is great. So Brian's working with KISS, Gary's working with SF2, and Steve's working with Liberty. And I saw you do an unboxing of one as well. So hopefully some of your input will go in there. And what I'm hoping for me personally is that the work of breathing thing gets figured out, at least to some degree, as much as it can, acknowledging that one of the benefits of side mount is different orientations as well. So you might end up on your side, and yes, you're going to end up, you might be in trim for most of the dive, but you are going to end up vertical or head down, head up, whichever way it goes. So I'm watching it with a lot of interest at the moment. Yeah,
like I say, I'm still really intrigued, but I'm not sure if physics and physiology really allows us to overcome that. That being said, I felt like the Liberty is the best in the work of breathing that I've felt so far, but we'll see. Maybe there's going to be some sort of a hybrid where we're moving part of the breathing loop back onto the body again. And
certainly that must be possible in terms of design. So interesting. Moving on, I recently spoke to Gary Dallas, so I'm talking to a lot of divers at the moment, but we talked about Bell Island, and he could hardly contain himself. Can you share your experiences in Newfoundland? Obviously very close to your heart as well.
Yeah. I was so thrilled when Gary won his first trip there. Came with me to go. Gosh, I guess it's almost 5 years ago now. My husband and I rode our bicycles across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That's 7,000 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And we finished our ride in Newfoundland on the east coast of Canada. And I reached out to the owner of a dive operation who dives the wrecks in the mine in Bell Island. His name's Rick Stanley. And I'd heard about him, and I called him up and I said, "Hey, Rick, can I, book some lodging at your resort? I'd love to spend some time with you, learn a little bit more about you, what you've got here, and finish my ride." Well, Rick followed us into St. John's on the end of our ride and then hosted us for 2 weeks. Wow. Took us all around Newfoundland, out to the wrecks, out to Bell Island. And before I knew it, I had this entirely new East Coast family in Canada. So I was incredibly moved by the generosity and kindness of everyone there. And I wanted to go back and bring people to this incredible place and wanted to, basically pay back that generosity by helping them build an ecotourism product.
Wow.
And so that meant bringing groups back over the years, but then also running a Royal Canadian Geographical Society and Explorers Club expedition to explore and start mapping the mine there, which is submerged after the pumps were turned off 50 years ago. So
and it sounds really special given that there wasn't a lot of warning about the pumps being turned off from my understanding. So everything is in place that was there at the time of the operation.
Yeah, it feels really intimate inside these passages because along the walls of the passage, wherever someone lost their life, and there was 107 miners that lost their lives there,
wow.
There's a little white cross on the wall marking the location. And so there's a story associated, a life associated with each one of these locations.
Yep.
And then there's other inscriptions on the wall and personal artifacts, and then the industrial archaeology of mining as well. So there's a lot to see. It's kind of like wreck diving inside a cave, but with this really personal, intimate feel to it.
I'm predominantly a wreck diver, and I understand that completely. I was in Truck Lagoon recently, and just the knowledge of the massive loss of life on virtually every ship that you dive. Number one, it's obviously a lot of fun to dive the wrecks, but at the same time, you have this feeling of what it must have been like at the time the ships were sunk.
Yeah, there's still a woman in Bell Island, and what's interesting is that her grandson has taken archaeology in university. So I've been talking with him over the years. I actually sold him my camera and my underwater camera and everything. He's now actually in medical school, so he's an overachiever. But his grandmother was living on Bell Island when the wrecks went down. Mm-hmm. And so at the moment that they were struck by German torpedoes, she got in her rowboat. And as the fires were raging, the boats were sinking, and men were screaming in the 0-degree temperature ocean, she rowed out there, hauled these guys into her little rowboat, took them ashore, and then nursed them back to health on her kitchen table.
Unbelievable.
And she's alive today to talk to. So, yeah.
And there's many stories of that in the Second World War, I know, but the courage that it was shown in some instances is just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Talking of exploring, so for any of our listeners who want to become explorers or kind of have that bent, what advice would you give them?
Dive. I guess, in all cases, don't wait for permission. Just go out and do it. There's so much exploration left to do. I mean, you can look at North Florida, the most busy cave diving spot on the planet, and there is still line being laid in the busiest cave on the planet, Ginny Springs, Devil's Eye, Devil's Ear.
Yeah, dive there, yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty to do there. I just moved this year to this new place south of Ottawa, Carleton Place, and I'm just doing all kinds of exploring, looking for caves, wrecks. Just last week, I got to do the first dive on a mid-1800s Canadian schooner that nobody's dived on before, and a couple days ago, I was poking around in the river in some new karst area for caves. There's plenty of exploration, so go out and do it. Yeah.
When you're exploring or pushing technical dives, it's not a matter of if, but rather when you have an issue. And obviously emergency skills practice is important, but the mental approach or the mental control is really the difference between, a good outcome and a bad outcome. Talk us through your approach to making sure that you're mentally ready for big dives.
Yeah. I do like a little bit of a pre-visualization. Like, first of all, I have lots of checklists from the time that I leave the home that I don't forget anything, to like this dedication to checklists, especially for, rebreathers, for safety protocols. Before I go on a dive, there's always going to be a little like Twitter in your stomach. There was the other day when I'm the first to drop down on this schooner, and I have to think about, okay, where's that coming from? What could possibly go wrong? And I literally make a list in my head. This could go wrong. That could go wrong. Well, I might have to bail out to my rebreather. Do I have enough gas? Yada, yada, yada. And I even physically in the last moments work through the tactile connections of, okay, well, I would have to reach back and turn off my O2 valve, or whatever I need to do. Like, where's my reel? Where's that bungee? Where's the clips? Where's the arrows? Whatever. And I touch everything before I go diving and make sure that it's deployable, make sure I know exactly where it is and can immediately hit it. And that way, when you've done that little kind of mental rehearsal, there's nothing to be scared of when you finally roll off the boat or swim into the cave.
Sure.
Now, when the shit hits the fan in the dive, for a moment, your breathing goes up, your heart rate goes up. And the first thing I say to myself is, emotions, you won't serve me right now, so just go away. And I just take a deep breath, and I'm frequently able to breathe slower in the moment of crisis than in a normal dive, because I go, whoa, time for air conservation. And I just take that deep breath and I go, all right, I don't know if I'm going to get home today. So what? I do know what the next best step is. And that's something I just rehearsed. Oh, there's that oxygen valve. Turn it off. Okay. What's the next small step? So everything has to be broken down into tiny, tiny steps. And if you keep taking those tiny steps in a march towards survival, then all of a sudden you've reached that exit or the surface or the bailout bottle or whatever it is. But the big picture's too much. So it's got to be small, measurable successes that you celebrate mentally, like, woohoo, okay, we solved that. Now what do we have to do? Oh, flush with diluent so I can breathe something safe. Okay, now I've got lots of time to figure this out. Just those small steps and victories keep you on the positive track.
And that makes a huge amount of sense. And obviously beating in the skills and repetition of doing those helps that process. But then at the same time, the mental management at the point of crisis is important.
Yeah, and you're never too experienced to jump back in the pool. I mean, last week, case in point, that schooner dive again. So it was deep, trimix dive. And I'm like, you know what? I'm pretty new to the Liberty. It's got fantastic features for trimix diving, but this isn't the dive to do that. So I set that aside, and it's like, okay, well, mentally my head's been in this, rebreather for months now. I want to jump back on my prism. So the first thing I did was I walked outside my house to the river and I did a 9-foot deep dive. And I walked through all the emergency drills and skills until I was totally fresh and had that manual pragmatic response back again on the prism. So you got to do that. I've got 7,500 dives or more under my belt, but I'm ready to jump back in the pool at any time just to make sure I'm fresh and ready.
Yeah, that's amazing advice for our listeners. You're never too experienced to practice, right? So I love that. So obviously we've talked exploration. You've talked a lot in previous interviews about water conservation. Can you share with us your thoughts and your work in this area?
Yeah, it really comes from my realization that as a cave diver, I'm swimming through the veins of Mother Earth. I'm inside the sustenance of the planet, in the freshwater drinking water reserves, and my eyes are on the water quality and the quantity and the changes in the baseline and the environmental effects that can be seen inside the planet. And I thought, well, this gives me a really awesome platform to talk to people. And my husband and I sat down a few years ago and started something called the We Are Water Project, because I wanted to formalize it a little bit more and just say, listen, every time I go on an expedition, every opportunity I get, whenever I'm in front of an audience, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about water literacy, where your water comes from, how you can conserve it, preserve it for future generations. And as a cave diver, I can just tell exciting stories about expeditions. And then when everyone's going, wow, with their mouths agape, I can just shove a little truth in there too and make them aware of the issues. So we did a little documentary film. That's why we did the ride across Canada. That was our zero carbon footprint tour to show the movie. And then we've written some kids' books in 12 languages and given away boatloads of those so that kids can read a story about water conservation. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. They're Explorer in Residence at the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. What does that mean?
So it's an honorary appointment. National Geographic has explorers in residence like Sylvia Earle, Bob Ballard, Michael Fay. A bunch of people are in that position. So the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, of which I'm a fellow and the first recipient of their exploration medal, they called me and said, would I serve as their first explorer in residence? And I'm like, sure. What do you want me to do? And they said, we have no idea.
You can write your own job description or position description.
Yeah. So they said, what would you like to do with it? I said, quite frankly, I want to go to school systems across the country and talk to kids about discovery and exploration and hybrid careers like mine and how they can sort of chase those dreams and be more mobile, creative, collaborative, and exploratory in their lives. So we found the W. Garfield Weston Foundation that would support the logistics for me to travel around the country and get to especially remote communities that probably never had a guest speaker in their lives and meet with kids. Sometimes a whole gymnasium full, sometimes small groups like kids in media, girls in STEM courses, kids interested in journalism. And I take my cameras and spend time with them, sometimes out in the field, sometimes just in presentations and workshop. And it's a really rewarding part of my life.
I can imagine. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Exploration, what are you working on now and what have you got planned for the future?
I've got a lot of things on the go. I'm just finishing up a movie documentary film. I've been all summer in the Arctic working on this film on climate change. So I've been swimming with polar bears and walrus and all kinds of stuff that's way more dangerous than cave diving.
Sounds it too. Yeah, those polar bears are hungry now, right?
Yeah. And now I'm working on a project called Underwater Canada where I'm telling stories of not just underwater stories, but water stories across the country to inspire people to get involved in both conservation efforts and just recreationally get in and enjoy the water. And I'm trying to do a major story or event in every province and territory of the country so that I can show people that there's opportunities to get wet wherever you live.
Even if the water's cold, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then this fall, headed with Brian K. Cook down to do some work with Bob Ballard this winter as well.
I don't have much more. It's been awesome to meet you on this call and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. And if anyone wants more information or needs to reach me, just reach out at intotheplanet.com. I try to respond to all the emails I get.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.